Welcome everyone to another deep dive into the fascinating, complex, and often misunderstood world of historical texts and ancient traditions. Today, we are going to explore a narrative that is as intriguing as it is controversial. We will be unpacking a specific historical account that has sparked intense debates, revealing profound insights into how ancient manuscripts are interpreted, defended, and challenged in the modern world. Whether you are a history enthusiast, a student of theology, or simply someone who loves unraveling the mysteries of the past, I encourage you to stay with me until the end. We are about to embark on a compelling journey that will challenge conventional narratives and prompt you to look at historical texts through an entirely new lens. To truly understand the story we are about to explore, we must first lay the groundwork regarding the nature of the Islamic Hadith. In historical and religious traditions, these massive collections are deeply cherished, revered by millions for containing the instructive words, actions, and daily habits of the Prophet of Islam. They serve as a profound moral and spiritual compass. However, these texts also possess a fascinating duality. While they form the foundational pillars of the faith, they simultaneously serve as one of the most potent weapons for critics and skeptics. It is, in every sense, a double-edged sword that cuts right through history and modern theological debate. There is a profound irony in how these texts are viewed today. Some contemporary skeptics and Western historians argue that the Prophet never actually existed, suggesting that the Hadith collections are nothing more than much later forgeries. According to this skeptical theory, these texts were carefully crafted by subsequent generations to establish a sacred, noble foundational myth revolving around a flawless and righteous figure. But here's where that argument hits a massive roadblock. If these stories were indeed late fabrications designed solely to glorify a holy man, why do so many of these accounts present him in a shockingly unflattering, vulnerable, and deeply problematic light? When confronted with bizarre or highly controversial accounts within these ancient texts, a common defense often emerges from modern defenders. They argue that we must view these events strictly through the lens of antiquity, claiming that what seems incredibly strange or unacceptable to our modern sensibilities was completely normal and culturally acceptable among the Arabs of the 7th century. However, this defense frequently falls short upon closer historical inspection. Consider, for instance, the well-documented narrations regarding adult breastfeeding, where a woman was allegedly instructed to offer her breast to a grown man to establish a maternal familial bond. Even in the deeply conservative, hyper-tribal, and patriarchal society of 7th century Arabia, such an idea was not a cultural norm. It was an incredibly radical, shocking, and anomalous concept that defied the logic of its own era. This brings us to the core of our discussion today, a remarkable and long-hidden narration that perfectly illustrates this historical paradox. For centuries, this particular account remained largely obscured from the general public, only beginning to circulate widely in the Arabic-speaking world via satellite television, debates around the year 2015. Despite its obscurity to the masses, this narrative is not found in marginal, rejected, or unverified books. It appears in several highly esteemed historical and religious reference texts, including the foundational works of the founders of major schools of jurisprudence. These texts are highly respected, widely preserved, and are actively taught in some of the most prestigious institutions of religious learning in the world today. The story is narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud, an elite figure historically regarded as one of the closest companions of the Prophet, and recognized universally as one of the most reliable and trustworthy transmitters of oral traditions. Abdullah's eyewitness account begins with a distinct air of mystery. He recounts that he was called upon to accompany his leader on a private night journey deep into the remote, unforgiving desert. As darkness completely enveloped the arid landscape, they reached a secluded, unspecified location. There, a deeply ritualistic act took place. The Prophet drew a line, likely a circle, in the desert sand. Abdullah was strictly instructed to stay behind this boundary, accompanied by a grave warning that crossing the line would result in his immediate death. Leaving his startled and undoubtedly anxious companion behind, the central figure walked off into the obscurity of the desert night, stopping at a distance roughly equivalent to a hurled stone. It was then that Abdullah witnessed a deeply unsettling and bizarre scene unfold. Out of the darkness emerged a mysterious group of men. While Abdullah does not specify their exact number, he provides a vivid and highly specific physical description, referring to them as the people of Zutt. He describes these approaching figures as incredibly tall, lean, and entirely naked. It is here that the narrative takes a highly controversial turn. According to Abdullah's explicit narration, these tall, naked men approached and began to ride the Prophet. The classical Arabic word used in the historical text is yakabun. This bizarre physical encounter continued throughout the entirety of the long desert night. During this agonizingly prolonged period, the men would occasionally leave the center of the encounter, circling around the terrified Abdullah, actively attempting to reach him. However, they were seemingly repelled by the invisible barrier of the protective line that had been drawn in the sand. Paralyzed by absolute terror, Abdullah's immediate instinct was to sit firmly on the ground, a defensive posture interpreted by many as a desperate attempt to protect his own body from the very vulnerabilities being exploited just a stone's throw away. As dawn finally broke and the first light of day pierced the desert horizon, the mysterious naked men began to depart into the wilderness. Shortly after, the Prophet returned to his companion. According to the foundational texts, he returned moving slowly, limping, and visibly in immense physical pain from the grueling ordeal. In another classical narration detailing the exact same event, he explicitly complained to Abdullah that the men had severely wounded him all night long. Exhausted, battered, and aching, he then laid his head in Abdullah's lap and fell fast asleep in the breaking daylight. To fully grasp the scandalous implications of this account, we must dive deeper into the historical and linguistic context. First, who exactly were the Zutt? According to early Arabic ethnographies and classical literary records, they were not mythological creatures, but a very real, documented migrant population originating from India and the region of modern-day Pakistan. The historical sources describe them as a robust, dark-skinned people, frequently employed for labor-intensive work or military service. More importantly, these ancient texts explicitly depict the Zutt as highly virile, possessing an almost legendary sexual prowess, characterized in the original Arabic sources by their distinctively large genitalia that allegedly never weakened or went limp. Equally important is the critical linguistic analysis of the Arabic word yakabun, translating directly to "they ride." While the term certainly carries the literal meaning of mounting an animal, such as a horse or a camel, it also functioned as a widely recognized, ubiquitous colloquial slang for sexual intercourse. This dual meaning is not a forced modern interpretation, but is firmly rooted in classical scholarship. For example, when commenting on other foundational texts, prominent classical commentators explicitly noted that a woman could be linguistically compared to a cow, horse, or camel precisely because all of them are ridden. Thus, the terminology used by Abdullah leaves very little to the imagination regarding the true physical nature of the events that transpired in the desert. In modern religious debates, particularly those initiated by former adherents who cite this very narrative as a primary catalyst for their departure from the faith, profound theological connections are drawn. Critics frequently juxtapose this dark desert encounter with traditional descriptions of the afterlife. They point to other established traditions detailing paradise as a place where the inhabitants possess a penis that never weakens. Because this specific phrasing flawlessly mirrors the exact historical and ethnographical descriptions of the Zutt's anatomy, critics argue that the most notable aspect of that traumatic, or perhaps consensual night, was essentially enshrined as a permanent fixture of celestial reward, perhaps even as serving as a private inside joke. When confronted with this exact narrative on live television or during intense debates, modern religious scholars and defenders of the faith are often forced into loud shouting matches, scrambling to provide a palatable explanation for the modern believer. The most common defense mechanism is an attempt to spiritualize the event. Apologists frequently claim that the Zutt were not human men at all, but rather jinn, supernatural, fiery spirits of Arabian mythology. They attempt to conflate this scandalous story with the famous Night of the Jinn, an entirely separate, sanitized event where scripture was allegedly recited to unseen entities. Consequently, they argue that since Abdullah was famously absent during the Night of the Jinn, his narration of the desert encounter must be a weak and fabricated tale. However, this apologetic defense quickly unravels when subjected to rigorous historical scrutiny. A thorough examination of early historical sources and even queries posed to modern artificial intelligence tools, which draw on vast historical databases, confirms that the Zutt were consistently and unequivocally documented as a human ethnic group, not supernatural spirits. Because the Zutt were flesh and blood migrants known for their physical strength, rebellious nature, and virility, the encounter simply cannot be dismissed as a mythological interaction with the jinn. Consequently, there is absolutely no historical or textual justification for dismissing Abdullah's harrowing eyewitness account as a weak fabrication. Ultimately, this fascinating narrative brings us right back to our initial paradox. It stands as a profound testament to the fact that these early historical texts are not mere sanitized forgeries designed to present a flawless, honorable figure to the world. Frankly, no group of devoted followers attempting to fabricate a noble foundational myth would ever invent a story detailing their revered leader being subjected to such a vulnerable, painful, and deeply scandalous encounter with naked men in the middle of the desert. Yet, at the exact same time, it perfectly illustrates why these very texts continue to serve as the most powerful and compelling weapons used by critics to challenge, question, and deconstruct the traditional narratives of the faith today. I hope this deep exploration has provided you with a fresh perspective on how history, language, and theology intersect in ways that are often carefully hidden from mainstream view. The past is rarely as simple, straightforward, or as sanitized as we are led to believe, and it is only by confronting these difficult texts directly that we can truly understand the profound complexities of history. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If you found this historical analysis thought-provoking and want to continue exploring the hidden depths of the past with me, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video. I would also absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this narrative, so please share your insights and join the conversation in the comments section below. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.